views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. Tonight's guest is the highest-ranking state official we've ever had on our program. He's also the first ever African-American Speaker of the New York State Assembly, an historical designation I know that he is quite proud of. Tonight, Assembly Speaker Carl Heastie makes his 10th appearance on Bronxtalk. We have many subjects to talk with him about, including the recent conviction of his predecessor on corruption charges and calls for ethics reform, his plans for the 2016 legislative session, and some Bronx issues as well. If you have a question for the Assembly Speaker, you can call in at 718-960-7261 or send them in an email to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org or post it on our Facebook page, and we'll read it on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, the Speaker of the New York State Assembly, the Bronx's own Carl Heastie. Good evening. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, Gary. Thanks for having me.
It's really a pleasure to have you, and as I was talking with you and some of the others before the show, from the minute you got that job, you said to me, I will appear on Bronxtalk again, and we really do appreciate you being here. Before we even talk about issues, let's just talk about the job that you got as Assembly Speaker. How's it been? You enjoy it? Do you pinch yourself sometimes and say, wow, this guy from the Bronx is the Speaker of the Assembly? Tell us how you feel about it.
I'll say it's really been great to be able to be a part of real intense discussions that improves and deals with the lives of 19 million people. There's a tremendous responsibility. It's something that I'm humbled by that my colleagues have given me the ability to do that. But it's been very, very rewarding because I think that we actually put together a good budget package this year under difficult circumstances. So it's been great.
People here in our home borough hailed this as a great opportunity for the Bronx. Maybe we don't follow specifically what you do to represent the Bronx there, because of course you have many other larger considerations. Has it been a good opportunity from the Bronx to have the Speaker of the Assembly be from our home borough?
Well, I'll say this, as I've gone around and visited the other 62 counties around the state, I've been very boastful that the Bronx will always be first among equals, and no one seems to give me an issue about that. But I do think it's a unique opportunity because, and it's not to say that any speakers that were before me didn't care about the Bronx. I think they did, but it's just a different conversation when you have somebody from the Bronx actually sitting at the table and having discussions with the governor, where we talk about when it comes to education and needs and poverty. Since the Bronx is unfortunately high up in those struggles, it does give us a unique opportunity.
Things you enjoy most, things you enjoy least?
The things I enjoy most.
Probably don't have a moment to sit and think about it.
No, actually, it's time-wise, it's not been much more of a strain on me at all. It's given me a unique opportunity to go around and visit parts of the state that I probably may not have seen in any other instance. As I always say to you, my frustration is always with the media.
Thank you.
To report a story and sometimes not report the truth. And that's something I continue to challenge all of the media outlets that reach out to me. That I don't mind them reporting stories about me, even if it's something that doesn't even put me in the greatest light. I just want people to be accurate in their reporting, and that's probably been my biggest challenge.
What did you learn from that tour upstate? I know that there's, historically in the state there's a lot of tension between upstaters and downstaters. Did you have some clarity as to the nature of that dialogue?
I would say anybody who uses that upstate versus downstate, they use it more for political reasoning and seasoning. to kind of make an issue, but there's never been a time, and before I became speaker, where a colleague raised an issue from somewhere upstate, and the city members said, well, we don't care because that's an upstate issue. That we do a lot of deferring in the conference. If it's an upstate issue, and a colleague says that it's important to them, we support it. So there's never been an upstate downstate divide. Now, what I did find on the tour is pretty much no matter where I went, you do have some regional differences, and but for the most part, everybody has the same mutual interest. They want just to have they want jobs, they want good health care and good education for their families. So wherever I went around the state, that was pretty much the same type of messages. Well, there's small regional differences on how certain things matter to them. Transportation sometimes, like in Buffalo, they wanted money for their mass transit, but then when I visited more rural areas, they had transportation needs, but they talked more about roads and bridges and how much the winters and flooding and things like that do damage to the infrastructure. So it was pretty much the same message, and I think that we're a diverse state, we're a large state, but I think that we have many more things in common than we have differences.
Let's talk about 2016. We're right on the edge of you and your colleagues getting back up to Albany. What's on your agenda, and what victories are you hoping to be able to, next year when you come back here at this time, to be able to tell us that we accomplished it this year?
Well, when I first was elected and we put together our budget resolution this year, we talked about putting families first, and we just want to expand that. We passed the minimum wage. We're happy to see that the governor has joined us in this desire, and we feel that's one of the best ways to lift families out of poverty is to pay people, even with low-skilled jobs, a minimum wage. We would love to see the DREAM Act to be passed. It's still difficult in the Senate, but we really want to continue to put our families first agenda, providing more opportunities and equality for women, women's agenda, because we feel like things that promote a women's agenda promotes families, and that's really going to be where our priorities are going to continue to be.
You were elected by your colleagues to the office when Sheldon Silver was indicted, and now that he's been convicted, the calls for ethics reform seem to be louder than ever. You created an office of ethics and compliance, but some of your colleagues want more. In the other house, Jeff Klein says all legislators should eliminate outside income. Your Bronx colleague, Jeff Dinowitz, put out a statement saying at minimum the legislators should be treated as full-time employees. Presumably that might mean a raise or certainly a change in the way they're compensated. Are these in the right direction? Are these a way of getting things squared away or even engaging the public confidence?
Well, these will all be things that we will talk about, but there's been like a double reaction. The indictment happens, people call for reform, we took action, and now that there's been a conviction, people want more. And what I said when I was in Albany it was a press gaggle, I said, we could get there, we may get there, but I said, but the reforms that we put in place in the budget, including more disclosure, I said, haven't even had a chance to take effect. So that didn't mean that I didn't say that we couldn't do more, but I just thought that if we did something in March and we want to see what happens when it starts up in January, all I said was it just hasn't had a chance to take effect. The concerns that people have about banning all outside income and having legislators work outside is, people always complain that legislators serve in office too long. So if you're a legislator and you can't earn any outside income or do any other skill, that may make people stay in the legislature longer, because if you're particularly a lawyer and you don't get to practice law for 6 or 7, 8 years, when you do decide to leave the legislature, you've been a little stale in your practice. So I'm just saying that sometimes there's unintended consequences. Does that mean that we won't get there someday, that maybe we should have a full-time legislature? But is the public ready to pay legislators $150,000, $160,000 a year? That's the other question. If you're going to have people go to a full-time, it's going to have to be a hefty pay raise from $79,500.
That is what I think it was the Daily News had on their front page when this notion came up in the city council, and then of course there was outrage that they were asking for some exorbitant amount around like 190,000. I wonder, though, if there is a balance. So just to conclude this, it sounds like from your perspective, you want to see what you've already put in place, how this office operates, how effective it is before you wholeheartedly...
Not necessarily. The internal things that we did was more for us, more of a feeling like I had, like even we've had two members had to leave office because of per diem issues. So we instituted a policy where members now have to verify that their presence in Albany in order to collect, a per diem. So we have tried to respond in some ways. I'm just saying that we made reforms in the budget about having more disclosure. I just feel that if you have outside income, it's pretty clear to me there should be no conflict of interest, and you should disclose your income.
What about, excuse me, what about this campaign finance reform, this so-called LLC loophole that allows...
Which we passed, but the media never gives us credit for it.
Well, here you go. So people are saying that, it's time now to eliminate the loophole. Let me just clarify for Bronx viewers that LLC corporations are allowed to donate as much as $60,000 to a campaign, which creates the potential, of course, for various kinds of abuses.
Right, and we passed that legislation
in the Assembly.
In the Assembly, and this gives some of the frustration that I have, that when the media and even the good government groups, they go on their tirades about needing to do things. I think one of the effective ways to get one of the houses to do something is call out that particular house on its own, and not just call out the legislature in general, because then the Assembly members don't get credit for passing it, and in the Senate, which has been very, I'd say, not wanting to hear at all on the LLC loophole, they kind of get hidden behind the word legislature.
It's like all of Albany.
It's all of Albany, instead of at least. And I'm not saying we should get credit, because there's probably some places people feel maybe the Senate does better than us. But I'm just saying, I think if you want to really talk about where people are, you should say the Assembly has passed the LLC loophole legislation, but the Senate has not.
What about the rules in the Assembly that bring a bill to the floor? Mm-hmm. And you were hailed, I think, repeatedly for being a members-friendly leader when you were the leader of the Bronx Democratic Party. But the rules still say that the Speaker dictates what comes to the floor. Is that the kind of reform we might get at some point?
Well, see, I think that people... when you say dictate, I think that's the wrong term. But sometimes, I'll give you for instance, on a piece of legislation that happened before I was even Speaker, where sometimes you have to give the Speaker the ability to say, hold on, I think we need to check here. One of my colleagues, Brian Kavanaugh from Manhattan, put in a bill, got it passed through the Election Law Committee, that said that we were going to change how we would do runoff voting in the city of New York. Now, I'm not on election law. I didn't really catch wind of it until it had gotten to the floor. And I said to the Speaker's Council at that point, I said, hey, we really need to have a large conversation about a bill that is now going to talk about changing how we do runoff voting in the city of New York. And then the bill was actually pulled off the calendar. So what I'm saying is, so you do have to give the Speaker the ability that sometimes, again, unintended consequences. I'm not trying to even, go against the principles of the bill. Brian Kavanaugh is a great member. He's well-intentioned. He's frustrated about what happens in runoff elections. But what I'm saying is, you do have to give the Speaker the ability to put the brakes on things.
The Times had an editorial today about potentially three different primaries. Do you see a chance to take a look at election law and say, you know what, all these primaries is not helpful to encouraging people to vote, and if you have one for the presidential election, one for congressional, one for state, you're asking voters to come out 3 times. It certainly runs up the tab for the public. Is there a better way to handle it?
Again, we don't have a problem in the Assembly uniting at least the legislative primary. The presidential primary is a little more difficult. It'd be great if we could line them all 3 up at the same time, but that one might be a little more challenging. But we would like to see the congressional primary and the state legislative primaries together, but again, and not to kick the can or blame the other house, but it's been their reluctance to be flexible on moving the primary up.
Let's talk about some Bronx issues. Many in the Bronx raised an eyebrow to the process that got Darcel Clark elected to be the DA. So I'll ask you the same thing I asked the borough president when he was here and asked Ms. Clark last week when she was here. Did anyone, whether it be the borough president, the Speaker of the Assembly, the head of the Democratic Party, the current DA, or even the DA-elect, say, maybe this process is not the best way to handle this, that, what, maybe if Mr. Johnson, you want to step down, why don't you do it before the election or go through the election, and then there could be a special election?
Primaries are probably always the best way to go. However, I think people should also realize it is the law, and you have the ability to do this. If he had gone through the election and then stepped down, then the governor would have been able to pick the district attorney. So it's not as though, so people feel that maybe the upper hand was given to Darcel Clark, but if the governor was to pick somebody next year, that person would have the upper hand.
When it was suggested, it didn't occur to you to say, hey, Rob, maybe you should say you'd step down before you go through the primary? It
has never been my job to tell people when to go, when not to go, what to do. I never tell people to run, not to run. Even when I was county chair, that's not my job. I felt it was never my job to do that.
So I guess the process was, he said, this is what I'm going to do, and you said, well, the law allows for this process.
This process has happened before, and I'm sure people can be troubled by it. Like I said, it's happened before. People run for different offices while they maintain an office. Our very own Hillary Clinton. We all knew when she was running for Senate for re-election, we all knew she was going to run for president. So people holding on to their office while they look for another office is not something new to politics.
Another Bronx issue that's creating significant concern is gentrification. Apparently you attended this Halloween party that many felt was an insult, as it was their suggestion that they could rename a part of the borough. How concerned are you that gentrification will move people who have been in the Bronx for generations and now they'd be priced out of their own community?
I think we can tackle this a lot of ways. Of course, we're always worried about moving communities out, but one of the reasons why people can't afford to stay in their neighborhoods, I think, is really because incomes haven't risen at the same rate as expenses. So I really think as we try to change some of the dynamics of how people are able to pay their bills and work and receive an income, I think can help that. And I think,
let me just interject. Okay. Certainly, education and access to higher education would be part of it.
Which we did in this budget, this year as well. We increased the opportunity program funding by 20%. We made a promise in the Assembly that we would double it in 5 years. So what I'm saying is, as we try to change some of the dynamics that have normally pushed people out because incomes have been suppressed, is one of the ways to do it. But I also say, we don't want to also, I'd say, just designate an entire area of the Bronx that it can only be housed, for poor people. And I think that if you do that, when young people go away to college and they get a good job, they may not want to come back to a neighborhood that they feel is only going to be situated for people with low income. So I've always been a supporter of mixed income neighborhoods. And so I wasn't really troubled by attending the party. I'm happy to see development happening in parts of the Bronx that never did.
I guess the issue people felt, and I'm not specifically designated to speak for them, but from what I read, is that they felt like they weren't included. And you've been in the Bronx long enough to know that when Bronx people feel like it's being done to them, then they have an input into what happens, then they get frustrated.
Listen, I can't speak to how people feel on that. I haven't really had any conversations. No one's expressed anything to me, but it's the guy wants to build market, apartments, and it is an enterprise that people can take on. But it doesn't mean that we want to say to the rest of the Bronx we don't care about people being pushed out of their neighborhoods. But I do think we do have to have a balance. You don't just want to have neighborhoods designated as only places where people with low incomes can live.
I will say this in the presence of the Assembly Speaker on television for the first time. We have reached out to the developers and we're in dialogue, and we hope they will come on the show and we'll be able to discuss this directly with them, which of course is what we're supposed to be doing here.
Sure.
In our long association, and I remember literally when you first got elected to the Assembly and then you became the head of the Bronx Democratic Party, you fought to remind me I'm also an Assembly member of a district. And now that you are the Speaker of the Assembly, are you finding it maybe difficult and you get distracted to deal with issues in your district, or are you still able, in essence, to be plain old Assemblyman Carl Hasty?
You know, when I did the upstate tour, it worked out very well. People think I gave up my entire summer, but I really spent the I'd say days during the week. But then I was back home in the district attending events on the weekend. So it really worked out. I think I saw
you at a couple of those events.
Right. So I don't think that it really was. It's really been a strain. My staff has been wonderful. And my community, actually, they are very understanding and supportive of the fact that they know they're going to see me less, but they don't feel any less of my presence in the neighborhood.
Maybe, excuse me, maybe that harkens back to the original question way back, that maybe they get represented a little better because you have a little more weight in what you say.
I don't want to make it seem like there's any favoritism.
I know you don't want to do that. I said it, not you. But really, you did hail a victory. I know that when Councilmember King was here, he was really happy about the city's RFP for a new community center in Edenwald. What do you expect? What are you looking forward to? Give us a timeline. What's the kind of programming you'd like to see? How is this going to go?
Well, this is something, and I probably talked about this when I was first elected. I know I probably brought this up. It's something that my community has wanted, I'd say, for decades. I think we've almost been victims of our own success. It's a very, upper middle class neighborhood, and sometimes it didn't attract the most attention.
For people who don't know, by the way, the Assemblyman's district is the Northeast Bronx.
Yes,
in large parts.
So to have the city recognize the need. So you said the time frame would, I'm being told that the RFP should be responded to in January. We have to do a ULURP process, which should take about another 6 months or so. So, I mean, I'd say we're really looking at getting shovels in the ground, I'd say hopefully by the beginning of 2017. What are we looking for? It's going to be a massive undertaking. We want to put all of the things that a community deserves that you would see in a community center, a pool, classroom space, meeting space, because it's not just a community center for children. We want it to be intergenerational. And one of the challenges that I've said to the groups is, particularly because even though I said it is an upper middle class neighborhood, we still have our pockets of poverty. I don't want any family to not be able to have access to the center.
Do you think whoever is selected to operate it, are you looking for new people to operate a center like that, or do you think maybe some of the existing organizations would then say, well, okay, we'll add this to our
well, there's a plan of what we would like to see, and like I said, it's a massive undertaking, the amount of square feet that this would have. So it will probably be, I would say, probably an experienced group I would say would respond. I haven't checked in at all to see who responded. I have the utmost confidence the city will make the right pick, and then we have to look together to do the funding package.
This is really a philosophical question about the city's RFP, and for years, as we've done this show for 21 years, I would say the thing that I hear from Bronxites, and we've talked about it on and off camera, the thing that we hear most is that we want opportunities for our children outside of school, after school. These are the things. Why does it take so long to get to a point where because you, I'm sure, advocated for that from the first day you were elected and even prior in your other roles. Why does it take so long for that kind of a thing to happen?
I think one of the challenges is it is an expensive thing to build.
Do you have
a
a price
center.
tag for this in your back of your mind?
I'm not sure. I have to wait until the RFP comes in.
That's fair enough.
And it'll all be public when it comes in. But it's a mass. It's really been a lot of elected officials have said that they will participate in this, including the mayor, including the city council speaker. So that's one of the challenges. I think you have to. This is not something that one elected official can do alone, because these things really cost a lot of money. And then secondly, there still are opportunities, and even this mayor, I have to give him credit, for trying to open up the doors of junior high schools. You do have facilities already there, but I would really say it really takes a massive undertaking and a group of elected officials to really come together to pull this off.
Committed, and then of
Committed,
course,
yes.
because these are not for-profit money-making
Right.
operations, so somewhere the money has got to come from somewhere. I guess on the other side of the coin, ACS wanted a detention center on Bruner Avenue, which Councilmember King and others opposed. I guess in that part of the Bronx, there's still always this fight over the city wanting to put, or others wanting to put, facilities that community doesn't want. Give me an overall vision of where that's at for your part of the Bronx.
So let me talk about that in general.
We've got about a minute.
Okay,
so
I'm gonna try to do it in a minute.
Do half that, and then I'll ask you another one.
So in conversation with the mayor's office, this was a Bloomberg issued contract. They had to do it. I actually sent pictures of how close, because this is called the Close at Home program for people, but it was really in between two homes. And so we actually worked out an arrangement with the city will have it there temporarily, and then they will move it. But sometimes I do think that it is sometimes there's oversights of that gets lost in the city where you want to do the right thing for the program, but then where you decide to site these things really becomes a problem for different communities.
Mm-hmm. Last question, sir. Give me a vision, overall vision about the where the state of New York is at right now, and what you believe the legislature is going to be able to accomplish.
As I went around and did the upstate tour, upstate New York was really in a crisis. I really think that tide has kind of stemmed a little bit, as in some of the major cities, the population dropping has bottomed out, and they're actually starting to have increases in population. So I think upstate New York is recovering. I think here in the city, we still have to continue to look at people who still, with all of the successes that's happened in the city, there's still populations of people who've left behind. That's our children are still, there's a challenge still to educate them. And one of the things we're trying to do in conversations with the governor, we want to have every struggling school in the state of New York to receive extra funding. One of the things that we've been talking about. So I do think there's a desire to now tackle some of the challenges that, even though the state has been trying to do progress on, I really think that's been a concentration that we would look at next year.
Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to invite you in public. You'll come back at some point?
Sure, I'll come back again.
We do appreciate your time. Thank you. Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on the show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, or put them on our Facebook page, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. We ask you to like Bronx Talk on Facebook, and you can check out the archives at bronxnet.org. We're on the lower right navigation bar. Now, next week, we'll do a show on active shooter responses, meaning we'll have an expert here who will give you tips on how to give yourself the best chance to survive in the subway, in the bus, at work, at school, church, or your place of business if the unthinkable should happen. A very important show to see. Thanks to our producer, Dalia Gonzalez, director is Shirley Arietta. Helen runs the prompter, the cast of thousands. Thanks to the speaker, and we'll see you next week.
Getting dumped by text is harsh. Try getting dumped by a tennis ball. My ex-owner drove me out to the woods, yelled fetch, and by the time I brought the ball back, he was gone. Yeah, I was pissed. But the folks at the shelter helped me let go of my anger. I learned coping skills, like taking it to the hole. Boom! Now I'm ready to fetch again. But how about I throw and you run and get it?